Big up and a warm welcome back to Sports Centric. Right, we're going to talk about AEW and we're going to talk about NXT and we're going to talk about Evolve. These wrestling firms are where talent that might not get seen on the main roster on Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown get the chance to shine and actually step out into the limelight. For example, Ricochet was bounced around from different shows. He didn't really get. He got a little run with the Intercontinental title, and he got a run with the United States title, I believe. But he was never a mainstream player. You even got the likes of Swerve Strickland, who was a extraordinary talent, but he doesn't really get the chance to shine in the WWE. But in AEW, they get the chance to step out into the limelight and make a character for themselves, especially the likes of Ricochet, like I mentioned earlier. Ricochet right now in AEW is in a rivalry with Chris Jericho. And while Jericho's at the end of his career, he still has that star potential. And for someone like Jericho to put across someone like Ricochet would be powerful in how Ricochet then looks. And it's the same with Swerve Strickland, like I said. Swerve Strickland was bounced around NXT. He had a run with the North American title, but it was never going to be a mainstream player. But in AEW, he's already been a world champion. And then you've got the talents from Japan, like Will Ospreay, who is a fantastic athlete and a fantastic wrestler. And right now, he's in a rivalry with the Death Riders, with John Moxley, Pac, the former. Let me get him all right now. The bar. Let me see. Cesaro, who is Castagnoli, and you have Marina Shafir in there as well. And you've got Wheeler Yuta, who's another fantastic athlete who's made his name in the indie scenes and come through. And you've also got Daniel Garcia, who lately joined it. But these wrestlers helping bring across the new generation is what you expect to see. This is what, and they're not actually having title runs anymore, but they're bringing these bigger wrestlers that were main stars who've had title runs are bringing across the younger athletes, and that's what you're looking for, a little continuity and transition. And this is why it's always good to watch these indie scenes, because like I say, you see the young hungry wrestlers who are going to come into the bigger firms later on, who are young and hungry and passionate to bring themselves across. And that's what you want in any sport, really, anyway. That's what I look for anyway. But like I said, you've got wrestlers like Tekla and Julia Hart who are underrated, who I feel are underrated, and they would never make it in somewhere like the WWE because there's so much congestion within the women's division that they don't really get a chance to shine unless they make it in the indie scenes and in films like AEW and NXT, Evolve, and the likes of MLW, NWA, and even the smaller ones underneath that. And when WWE started under Vince McMahon, if you watch the documentary, that's what he started to devour as a company. He started to bring up these younger, different wrestling firms in the different states, and started to. And wrestlers were working for them, but they were also working for the WWE. So they were shining on the indie stages and finding a transition into the WWE. But at some point, the WWE became so big within itself when it incorporated WCW and ECW that it left the indie scenes behind. And so the young wrestlers didn't find a transition into that company until the WWE created NXT, and then later on, like I say, Evolve, and before that you had 205 Live, where the young wrestlers then would be able to set themselves out and establish themselves. And then if you watch wrestling firms like MLW, for example, you get to see them as well. And this is why I like the Forbidden Door art element from AEW, where at the beginning they've made ties with the likes of TNA when Kenny Omega became a champion of both TNA and AEW. But they also made a connection with with loads of Mexican wrestling corporations. And then they also made a tie to themselves and the Japanese wrestling firm. So they have wrestlers coming in from that division as well. And that's where Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay made their names. So there's a common tie between the two different firms. And this opened the door. And lately, WWE have opened their door in that aspect with creating a partnership with TNA when it comes to NXT. This is why you have the likes of Ariana Grace having the TNA World Heavyweight title, the TNA Knockout title. So they're seeing where they made a mistake, and under Paul Levesque, they've actually made connections with different wrestling firms. And actually, while you look at it, on the face of it, it's a connection that helps TNA try and establish themselves with a wider scope because WWE's fame. And it also gives their wrestlers a chance to shine, and then their wrestlers step up into NXT. And so it's a mutual connection that you're looking for, and that's what they found. Right. And with that in term, I'm going to mention Blake Monroe. And Blake Monroe was in AEW. She was as Mariah May and a concierge to the timeless Toni Storm. They had one of the best rivalries in TNA for the TNA World Women's title. And the last match was a last woman standing match. But Blake Monroe won the title from Toni Storm in England, and Toni Storm won it back in Australia. And after a run of the title, and she looked good with the title, I can't lie. She did have some good defenses with the title too. But now, after the rivalry she had with Toni Storm and the last title match they had, she left there and went to NXT as Blake Monroe. Now, her character is starting to come through that we saw in AEW with the dark element, because she is a very, very good wrestler. And she's very good when she's mixing it up with some stronger dark elements. And especially when she's a heel. Like I say, she's a fantastic heel. And the way that she's come across when she's fighting Blake Monroe for the NXT North American Women's title is a good rivalry. And like I say, the likes of Tatum Paxley, they get the chance to shine in NXT and people get to watch them and see them perform. And while they make mistakes, because everyone makes mistakes, that's life. You make a mistake, I make mistakes, you make mistakes. It's about owning them in the end. When you watch her wrestle, and you watch the wrestling match that they did on the past NXT last week, and it was a casket match for the North American Women's title. The use of the diamonds from Blake Monroe fitted her character perfectly, and she hit her finishing move. She tried to roll her into the box. Tatum Paxley into the box. Tatum Paxley used her title and it was creative in that element where she used her title to basically avoid the casket from being closed, and then her to then hit her finishing move, like I say, on the diamonds, and then roll Blake Monroe into the casket to retain the title. All you can say is one of the best matches that we get to see. And it wouldn't have been out of place at WrestleMania. That's how good the match was. The next match we're going to talk about, the last match was Sol Ruka's final farewell versus Cesaro. Now, anyone who watched Raw and you see all the introduction of Ruka and Raw, this is the problem with Monday Night Raw, because Monday Night Raw is on a Monday and NXT is on a Tuesday, and therefore we can actually see what's going to happen before. So, like, Ruka, joined Monday Night Raw the day beforehand, so you knew the night afterwards at NXT was her last night in NXT, and then she was going to then move across. So Zarya coming out on Raw led up to the match that they had last night. And like I said, they were a good tag team and a good duo. And then as it progressed, you could see that Saruka was going to get promoted, and the fact that everyone loves her finishing move and everyone likes the way that she wrestles, and her character is engaging. The surfer chick is engaging. So it's well worth. That's why I say it's worth watching NXT to see these young athletes step into the limelight. When you watch, for example, the Zarya match, there's a lot of energy and a lot of storytelling into the performance. And we saw Zarya come out on Raw. She hit Ruka with the spine buster. And last night's match, it was fierce pace. It was not a 15 foot in the air. Come on now, we're not going to go there. But the end of the match, when Zarya basically played the game of "I'm still your friend, please forgive me," we all knew where the outcome was going to end, and Soroka sold it perfectly as she went backwards into the table, and Zarya was the last woman standing. And it's helpful for Zarya because, like I say, Zarya is going to be left behind on NXT, so she's got the left now. And Soroka's got the perfect farewell to her to start her Monday Night Raw career. So there's a smooth transition over. Now the question is, on Friday Night SmackDown, what's going to be the surprise NXT stars who are going to go there? Because I got a feeling JC Jane might be one of them. And who else is going to go with her? That is the question. Will it be Ricky Saints stepping up and becoming a SmackDown athlete? That's to be decided. But throw your questions into the chat, and what do you think is going to happen regarding this? Now, as I step back, I'm going to talk about football as we go into the last few minutes, and it's going to be my thoughts on Chelsea. Chelsea, I believe, are in a mess. And Liam Rossini did not help the situation. I felt that what they were doing is basically scrambling around looking for a coach. But the ensemble of players they have here don't fit what the coach is looking for. The centre-backs here and the second Brighton goal, you can see that there are sixes and sevens. The moment that ball broke to a Brighton player, the way they pushed forward, and then you watch them defensively, and it was shocking. It was appalling. But that was Liam Rossini basically asking players that are middle of the road to go and attack, and they've got no positional awareness. That's what I looked at anyway. As Brighton rushed forward, and by the way, I have to mention this because I'm going to do one of these actually before the World Cup, and that is Kadeja. And what a player he is. And Turkey are dark horses for this World Cup. I'm going to say this now. Turkey have some proper quality players. You have the likes of Arda Güler, and oh my word, if you remember the Euros, what a goal from Arda Güler. And he's now coming into his own. You've got the guys of Yildiz, and there's a few in Galatasaray. And you're looking around and you're thinking there's some dark players over there. Do not sleep on Turkey and the quality that they have. And one of them is the Brighton player who scored their first goal. He is well worth watching. And like I say, you've got Yildiz at Juventus. And then you've got Arda Güler, who's now stepping out into the shadow, stepping out at Real Madrid as their cam just behind Mbappe. And I would be paying special attention to Turkey in the World Cup coming up. But yeah, Chelsea, I believe whoever the manager is. Oops, sorry, nothing on here. Big up the chat. Chelsea. What thoughts on Chelsea? To be fair, because Chelsea, to me, like I say, I think it's more than a manager. And there's talk of Fabregas coming in, and I'm going to talk about Como versus Inter Milan here when I mention this. And he is very much a rookie, still learning on the job. I believe the Chelsea job, if you're looking at a man more experienced, one like him, he needs to go out there a bit more and earn his stripes for me. That's what I would be looking at when it comes to Fabregas. Big up the chat there. Let me see if I can see you. Can we see you today? It looks like it. Big up the 2 marks, sure. Every time. But yeah, my thoughts on Chelsea is that I believe it's bigger than a manager. A bit like the Spurs job, it's a mess. And until they sort out the personnel and what players they have to get rid of and buy players for specific positions, I can only see another man coming in there and suffering, to be fair. Now, I'm going to mention another team is Manchester City. Manchester City are on a wicked roll. And I said Manchester City would win the league from the start. And the reason I said Manchester City is because, no disrespect to Arteta, he is a very good manager to a certain level. He can take you to the promised land, but he can't take you inside it. So he could take you so far, but he can't carry you over the line. And it's been that way for years. And I looked at him specifically in one match, and it was Tottenham versus Arsenal match. And when Conte was the manager of Tottenham Hotspurs, now we had scored 1 goal, and defensively, I believe it was Rob Holding committed a wicked foul and gave away a penalty, and Harry Kane scored. And I looked at Arteta on the touchline that day, and I saw him playing with his face, touching his face here, and you're thinking, you have no ideas. You've got nowhere left to turn. You are just basically don't know what you're doing on the touchline. And then later on, I'm hearing that he got a new contract, £50 million a year, and you're thinking, my man's got nothing. He's winging it real bad. When the times get tough, that's when you see how good a person you really are. It's all good to do it, yeah, when the sun is shining. But where are you when it's cold outside? It's all good talking the talk when there's nothing on the line, but the moment there's pressure, Arsenal fold. And it's been years in the coming. You watch them in the Europa League losing to Sporting Lisbon, it's the same. You watch them losing to PSG last year in the Champions League, it's the same. He's left there doing long throw-ins because he's got nothing left in the tank. They rely on set pieces because there's no end product at the end of moves. There's nothing. And you watch them and you think it's a detriment to the Premier League that they were top for so long. They're a poor team. They're awful to watch if you sit there and watch them. I feel sorry for people who actually paid to go to watch that because I'm bored just watching them after 5 minutes. Like Tottenham, I'm bored after 5 minutes, to be fair. Fair play to you, mate, for paying to go to watch that because I ain't. But that's the level of the Premier League that they are top. But at least with City, yeah, you can see there's a lot of players who have actually got ability. And it just took them time to get used to the Premier League and the environment. And once they did, and once they clicked, and once Semenyo and Guehi is a fantastic player. Him, I'm looking forward to seeing in the World Cup. I can't lie. And Cherki for France, like I said, if I see Deschamps coming with a 3-man midfield, yeah, I'm going to be vexed because you've got the likes of Cherki, you've got the likes of Akalouche, and then they got the likes of Doué behind Mbappe, and you're gonna play a 3-man midfield, a 3-man defensive midfield. Yeah. That's not it. I want to see that kind of three behind Mbappe, to be fair, and see them rushing teams, because you're looking at teams going forward, and you imagine that going on the counter attack. Yeah, that's dinner time. But we're going to talk about France before the World Cup. We're going to talk about different nations before the World Cup and their strengths and weaknesses, what players we're going to be looking forward to seeing in the World Cup, and we will talk about it. Like I said, we've mentioned Turkey already today, and we've mentioned France. But sometimes you have to get downright dirty, and City gritted it out last night. They created a lot of opportunity against Burnley, and they hit the post early on. And then the man, the myth, the legend, Erling Haaland showed up and scored the winning goal, the one goal. But they still created chances, and they should have finished them off. Burnley, though, people have to remember, were fighting for their lives. They weren't mathematically relegated. And so there was still an opportunity for them to try and fight to stay in the Premier League. So it was a difficult game for Man City anyway, especially coming off the Arsenal game. So they did very well to win the game. And now they're top of the league, and I can only see one winner, and that's Manchester City. Like I said to Cookmeister, big him up every time, especially in the chat. Can you hear the sound of jaws, mate? Because I can hear it loud and clear where I am, brother. Now, the last match I'm going to talk about was Leeds versus Burnley. Both teams. No, Leeds versus Bournemouth. Let me get it right. Bournemouth have nothing to play for, and Leeds were still mathematically possible to get relegated. Leeds, like I said, have been showing fight for weeks. Players that we wouldn't give a chance to, the likes of Dominic Calvert-Lewin, are actually doing some bits at Leeds United, but that's the way they play, and Daniel Farker. And this is why you have to give him a lot of respect. Big up Ghosted. A lot of respect in the aspect that he's actually gone out there, looked at what he's needed in a forward, and they've brought in Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and they're getting results coming in. And then they've got players in the midfield, and their midfield is strong. And they've bought exactly what they needed to get the best of the players that they have and allow them to play in a natural position. And I'm going to say another team like that is West Ham. West Ham in the transfer market, in the transfer window in January, looked at what they needed in their squad. They needed a 2 strikers, so they brought in Luca Castellanos from Lazio, and I watch Lazio and I support Lazio in Serie A. That is my team. I have supported them since the day that I went over with Paul Gascoigne and then the beginning of Football Italia, and believe we will talk about Football Italia, because that raised a generation of fans to appreciate football. And the superstars that we got to see, the likes of Rui Costa, the likes of Gabriel Batistuta, the likes of Ronaldo R9, the likes of Recoba, need to be talked about because they were superstars. The likes of Marcello Lippi on the touchline, the cigarette smoking man from Naples who changed the generation of football. If I told you the managers that came out under and learned from the likes of Marcello Lippi, the likes of Zinedine Zidane, who, if everyone knows, has won multiple Champions Leagues at Real Madrid, the likes of Antonio Conte. Yes, Antonio Conte owed a lot to Marcello Lippi in the way that he brought about that winning style of the 3-man midfield, the 4-3-3, the way that it was implemented under Marcello Lippi. Like I said, it changed a generation of football. The likes of Paulo Sousa, even the World Cup winning French manager Didier Deschamps learned from Marcello Lippi. He's football and his formation and his style of play lives on. And like I said, it's changed a generation of football if you look back at it. But like I said, I got to see the Grandmaster. It's a bit like and I'm going to mention it on my channel, The Master and the Apprentice, when you look at it in the main, if you want to be feeling on a movie level. And you watch how they play, and you know what type of players they need. And this gives you me a sample size of when people saw Conte come to Spurs, for example. I knew what kind of players that he would need, knowing that I've watched Matteo Lippi's football before. I know what type of football you played because I know Matteo Lippi. I watched Juventus. I watched Napoli before that. He came into Napoli the year that Maradona left. And like I said, he won Champions Leagues. He's won everywhere he has been, Matteo Lippi. It's well worth investing in. Sometimes in life, you've got to look at the history to understand where you're going to go in the future and build a basis for your argument. But with that, I'm going to step back today and I'm going to say thank you very much for tuning in. And we'll see you next time on BMGT. I lie, I keep lying. There you go. On Sports Centric. Thanks very much for tuning in.